The following video is based on statistics and analyze, obviously, my interpretation of it, and me looking at the interpretation of these things. Now, this is necessitated in the United States for specific reasons and laws. Globally, we have about 1 billion small arms, not cannons, not anti-aircraft weapons, and 86% of them are civilian owned out of 1 billion firearms. And the rest are police or military owned. Canada has 3 million registered civilian firearm owners, and the only reason we know that is because of the registration. The rest of the world may or may not have registrations. It's variable. 400 million of the 1 billion guns on the planet, or 46%, depending on how you look at it, are privately owned in the United States. Or not. It could be 300 million or 200. People sometimes adjust the number of guns in the United States because it's such a huge number of guns that they want to emphasize how much it is, or sometimes emphasize how little there are, sometimes in the same sentence, because they're talking about the rate of homicide per guns or per owners. The following information is primarily from sales, surveys, and a few states that have registries for guns and some of the older federal registries for weaponry. Because current U.S. federal law prohibits central registries of firearms owned by private citizens to be maintained beyond a certain point, and many were purged for many reasons I'm going to bring up. A majority of Americans say when you do a survey they want gun laws to be more strict. So I'm going to discuss the impetus for this. Let's talk about history so far. 1990s, you found that 57% of gun owners said they had them for hunting, target, and sport shooting. The year 2001, 50% said that they had long guns for hunting, sport, and shooting, and had an average of 4 firearms total. I didn't have the number of average guns before. This went up to 5 firearms average in 2020, with 67% saying instead that it was self-defense handguns instead of the 50%. So it's obviously, a lower number of them for sport shooting, I guess. 38% for hunting and 30% for sport. Oh yeah, they have overlaps. So you can't just use one percentage to figure out the others. It doesn't work. You have to find out all of them. Of the gun owners, they had a self-defense handgun 67% of the time, 38% of the time a hunting rifle, shotgun, pistol, or 30% sport, rifle, shotgun, pistol, etc. Yeah, you can use a pistol for hunting. Many places prefer it. In fact, there's a handgun hunting season-ish kind of thing in some places. This excludes muzzle loaders, cannons, and actual howitzers people own because it's not illegal to have them in the United States at all. They're considered a destructive device, but most of them are grandfathered. Bet you didn't know that. 1978, a little over half of the people reported owning a gun, 51%, almost exactly. This went down to 31% in 2017, and 22% in 2020. Fewer people report or tell you that they have a gun, because again, we're not requiring gun registries. That's one of the big deals people want. Some people want a gun registry for accountability. Others want a gun registry so that we know how many guns we have and how many gun owners, and get accurate statistics. If you're against having accurate statistics, that says you don't want real answers, but also you might be against gun registry because of the history of abuses of gun registries that actually does exist. Not necessarily as bad as you might be thinking if you are against them, but they do exist. I'm going to explain why I don't really think that may be necessary, but let's continue. 66% of households reported having a gun owner in 2017. This went down to 40% reporting or admitting they had gun owners in the home in 2020. 1995, 33% of the civilian-owned firearms were handguns. That went up to 42% by 2020. That's 25 years and an increase of maybe, I guess, 50%. We'll just call it 50% for fun. Handguns. if you're not aware of this, I call this the high point factor and the easy partner shotgun factor. You can get a handgun for under $200 fucking now. You can get a $100 shotgun, and you can get rifles are harder to find. Shotguns do a fuck ton more damage. People buy things that are cheap. But anyway, let's go on. Even Gucci Glockers can get them cheap. And if you're not aware of this channel, you can just make these things bizarrely cheap. And the one that has the least difference between brand new, store-bought versus handmade is a damn 12-gauge shotgun made out of a couple of hunks of pipe. But let's continue. And yes, there's a way of making it exactly the same functionality as a real shotgun. In 2017, Stephen Paddock had 42 firearms, some of which were involved in the shooting, some were not. 47% of gun owners in the same year had 3 guns. 50% owned 1 or 2, but not 3. 3% of the gun owners, or people in the United States, depending on how you look this up, own 17, on average, guns. Now, this is derived from 8 to 140 guns owned to make an average, because obviously the average isn't 140, which included trusts and privately held gun range, so you could go shooting in a state that restricts shooting areas by not owning the gun. You didn't have to have a permit in most states to walk onto a gun range and just fire a weapon. Because you don't. You don't have to have a gun permit to shoot someone else's gun on their own property. Lots of places in fairly restrictive states, instead of just a restrictive area like Portland, Oregon, decided to make it to where you could just go to someone's house and shoot. And some of them charged money or took donations, depending on whether you're legally allowed to do this. This also included, apparently, people who were gun collectors and sometimes museums. But hey, we got a high number here. So yeah, 3% of the people in the United States, or 3% of the gun owners, I think it would be gun owners at this point, have over half or about half of the actual total of guns. So really, the total number of guns at 150 million guns are spread out with all the gun owners. Yeah, so less than half the population on average has a gun, because it is. And they have about 100 and some odd million guns between them, so it's really 1.5 gun per capita, except for the outliers at 3%. And again, a lot of these are collectors. Some of them are crazy people, you could decide that, but a lot of them were private gun range owners. Just dead ass, they're just running a gun range, or they're running a gun trust so that you don't have to own the damn thing. Some of these gun range owners, because of the legal requirements in the United States for ownership of certain prohibited or restricted weapons, have a fuck ton of machine guns. That wasn't mentioned in this. So yeah, you can go to a gun range and just fire a machine gun. You don't even have to fucking have a permit in most states. It's not illegal to touch a machine gun and fire it on a private range when it's owned by another person. And again, the machine gun's only restricted by a damn tax. It's expensive. That's it. We make it expensive. 2010, homicide deaths using a gun per our 309 million Americans alive at the time. 11,000. 2018, homicide deaths, 10,000. 40% of them done with a handgun. In both cases, the death rate from the guns in homicides or some other violent act that would result in a homicide accusation or conviction, depending on what you're looking up, was about half of what the suicide rate is. And guess what weapon is used most for suicides? In the case of homicide deaths, 40% of them were handguns. The rest were other or unidentified. That's because they couldn't find the gun that was used to fire the bullets, so they didn't know if it was a rifle, and that's about it. Or they had fragments and couldn't tell if it was a shotgun, rifle, or pistol because the fragmentation was too much. It could have been copper-plated pellets. They don't know. or they didn't find enough ballistic information to even determine what kind of metal was involved. A through-and-through hole in a person who's died can be done by any bullet, and if it's big enough, you wouldn't even tell if it's a shotgun slug. But on suicide rate, yeah, over half of most of the suicides were actually by pistol, but I'm not going to get up the statistic because it's really, really severe. Homicide rate is half of the suicide rate. Emphasis fucking added. Okay, come on. 2018, 70% of confirmed homicides with a handgun versus 4% confirmed with rifle or shotgun. 26% were other. Again, we don't know what hit them or what from. That's a quarter of the time. There's no ballistic data. You can't even figure out what kind of gun. Remember that for a homicide. CSI is bullshit most of the time. Well, no, it's only bullshit about 26% of the time. But 70% of the time it was a handgun for a homicide. 4% it was a rifle or shotgun. That means an AR-15 is not used in the majority of any murders in any way you can measure it. Or an AK-47 or anything else like that. It's a fucking handgun. 2010, half of all suicides were done by gun because firearms, no matter what type, are the most lethal method for suicides. Full stop. And the most commonly used one in murders is a handgun. And the easiest one mechanically for people to use is a handgun as well. Handgun. 2016, of 38,000 firearms deaths, this is a statistic derivative, out of 300 million guns that could exist, that would provide a 0.01% death rate. Yes, I'm going to compare this to the death rate from COVID-19. If we base it on the 100 to 16 million gun owners, people keep citing that number range because it's an unknown and it's a guesstimate, and because that can make it worse of a death rate. Then we could say our infected population of gun owners, the gun zombies, if you want to, for the zombie apocalypse thing, that's a 0.038% to 0.23% death rate by gun owner, depending on how you do this. And as I've mentioned here, if you're going to claim there's a shit ton of guns in the United States, that means there's a vanishingly tiny death rate per infection of having a gun. That's the whole death rate. That's including suicides. The death rate in the United States per capita dictates that it's a less than that's actually 0.01% death rate, up to a 0.25% death rate. At worst case scenario, if people suddenly magically decide there's only 16 million gun owners instead of 100 million, it's more like 100 million, so the death rate per capita per infection is 0.038%, really. So let's divide that down, because we have let's call that the same death rate as from the flu, the actual flu, not a claim about COVID-19. Should we stop the flu? Of course. Again, how are you going to do this? Out of 14,000 crimes from 2007 to 2011, less than 1% had anybody defend themselves with a gun. The argument that you're going to use it with this many people carrying just doesn't show up very much. Other things, we'll talk about the gun homicide rate, but when you look it up, you find out it's only 440 cases, and they looked up exclusively crack houses. That's not representative of the population. Why do you need more than one pair of shoes? You don't. You just want more shoes. Or you have to have steel-toed boots, sneakers, maybe dress shoes, maybe some slippers, maybe flippers. Maybe you have specific reasons for each one of them. Maybe we should look at real reasoning here. The death rate from guns existing is not correlating to a high death rate in the United States from guns. Most of the deaths are suicides. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with it.